Hey there. Oh, there we go. Hey there, and welcome to Into the Terminal, episode 46. Today, we're going to be talking about deploying your operating system using Kickstart. And joining me today is Mr. Nate. Nate, take us away.
Hey folks, so first what we're going to do, we have a nice tool on our customer portal where you can create a Kickstart file using a nice little GUI here, right? So we're going to walk through some really simple changes to a Kickstart file, and then we're going to show you what you get out at the other end. So first of all, Eric, since you're driving here, if you want to go down, and of course, if you're going to build a server, you got to give it a root password, right? So give it some kind of a root password there.
Something super secure, I hope.
Something super secure, totally. I'm sure it's not just Red Hat, right?
Oh, never, never.
Okay, and then of course there's options here whether you want to reboot the server at the end or not. We're going to do a text mode installation. That's what Eric just checkmarked there. Installation source, we're going to be putting this onto a DVD or an ISO file, so we're going to leave that set to DVD. All right, the partition table, we're going to leave it stock here. However, if you uncheck that use automatic partitioning, you could then define your own partition table if you'd like to. Remove all existing partitions is an important one. You're building a new system, right? So you're probably going to want to remove them, but if you have drives that already have data on them, that's a thing you're going to want to think about, right? So, all right, there's some bootloader options. We're not going to change these around, but packages, we got to do something to make this just a non-standard RHEL build, right? So you can select an architecture, right? In our case, it'll be x86-64. Minimal install, if you recall, this is like the package set you want to install. So we're going to leave that at minimal. And if you go down to the categories, let's just add in the built-in backup client rear. So if you go down, no, not in there. Leave that where it is, where it says backup client underneath your list there. Just click on that. And then in the list, oh, you clicked off of it. Go back up there. Click on backup client. There you go. And then put a check mark in rear. Okay, and then after we install, we can see that that was actually installed on the system. All right, and then there's a whole lot of other options here. You can do things like add in your single sign-on or same sign-on or LDAP authentication or whatever. You can configure networking. We're going to leave it as DHCP. We can customize the firewall if we'd like, but again, we're going to leave this stuff at the defaults for now. If you want to just scroll to the bottom, actually, no, at the top, there's a button for download. If you click download, it's going to generate a Kickstart file and let you download it right here. Now, what that'll do is it'll give you just a plain old Kickstart file, and you can do with that what you will. What we've done is we baked that Kickstart file into an ISO, and Eric is going to boot up that ISO in a virtual machine on his laptop here. And what you'll see is when it boots up, trying to give Eric some time here, but once it boots up, it'll give you a boot menu where it'll ask you, what, just like a normal RHEL install disk will do, and there'll be an option in there, which I created when I made the ISO file, that tells it we want to kickstart the system. So let's just give this a moment.
My laptop is screaming at me right now.
Why are you trying to do a live stream and boot a VM? All right, now go to that top option for Kickstart installation of RHEL 9. If you think ahead, of course, you can make that the default option. So if you just popped this into a VM and turned it on, you could essentially walk away until the install is finished.
All right, so that, in a nutshell, in all of 4 minutes, is how to go through and basically build a Kickstart using a predefined lab that we provide, and the link will be in the show notes. As this runs, we're going to go ahead and transition into the second half of our show. We'll be talking about how to build your own Kickstart files. We'll talk about Kickstart versus image builder. And of course, this will be the part of the show where you get to ask questions and be part of the content. So we'll see you on the other side. All right, welcome to Into the Terminal, episode 46, Deploying with Kickstart. Joining me is Mr. Nate Lager, and you are remote today, sir. What is going on there?
I am completely remote today. I don't know how many customers realize this, but the last week of October, we celebrate as We Are Red Hat Week, and I'm out co-working with a bunch of other Red Hatters. So we're in the back room at a local establishment with a bunch of folks here, and we're just kind of working together for the day. So Brian lucked out; he gets me remote. instead of in my nice quiet home office.
Actually going to try and put this into a smaller window off to the side so we can watch
There
it
we go.
as it runs. I know that's not ideal, but we can watch it run in the background. Um,
No,
and
that's great.
and that's, I mean, that's dedication, sir. You came and joined us, even though you're hanging out with a bunch of other Red Hatters. Meanwhile, Mr. Scott McBrien decided that he was going to be about 36,000 feet in the air. So for some reason,
Yeah,
that doesn't work for live streaming.
yeah. It's definitely more difficult to live stream from an airplane than it is from a an eatery. So
So Scott will be back next week, and we'll kick off our troubleshooting arc then. So for those of you that were expecting to see how to troubleshoot system performance or disk management, one of the two, that will return to our regularly scheduled programming next week. Um, but in the meantime, bootstrapping systems and getting to sort of a golden image is something that has been a problem that I've faced as a systems administrator literally since my first job as an intern, trying to use Norton Ghost to build out desktop systems. And so it seems like every position I've been in since then, I've tried to I've tried to solve this problem of how do you get from we need a server to we have hardware or a virtual machine to we has server and we has workload. Um, it's kind of evolved over the years from Norton Ghost with Windows desktops to into probably the next step was virtual templates. A lot of companies I worked for used VMware ESX, so a lot of those were build out a template, take a snapshot of that template, and then deploy that over and over again to all of your different systems. But one of the reasons why when Nate agreed to jump on with us today was that you had a lot of experience with Kickstart. And that's not something I did much of. I knew it existed, but never really did much more than just let's grab a vanilla image, let's pull the Kickstart configuration file out of that, and go from there. So why don't you talk to us a little bit about what you've done with Kickstart and how it helps to deploy virtual machine or
sure.
hardware or virtual machine images.
Pretty much
Um,
any Linux that runs an Anaconda based installer can use Kickstart. Okay, so Kickstart is actually a relatively old technology, and I don't want to say old like that's negative. It's actually very powerful and very versatile, which is why we can still use it today and why it's still included in the Anaconda installer. So basically, all a Kickstart file is a bunch of instructions that tell Anaconda the answers to the questions you would be answering during that graphical install. Right? You can tell it what packages you want to install, what partition layout you want, what users you want to add, and it even adds some pre and post functionality so that you can run a script before it even starts or a script right after it's finished. So that if you need to do anything that's not already included in the Kickstart file, you can do it just by running a bash script that runs at the end or before the Kickstart, right? So, and then this can be baked into an ISO image like we did for the demo today. It can be called the installer. You just add a kernel command arg that says ks equals, and you can point it even to a remote location over FTP or HTTP. So yeah, there's a lot of functionality and versatility there. You don't have to use an ISO. You can use a Pixie boot. You can use what I was doing was through satellite. Satellite has a lot of functionality built into it where you can Pixie boot, pass off a Kickstart, and have all your definitions and whatever your build automation is called during the Kickstart, right? And Satellite has a pretty robust Kickstart template built into it already that leverages all that. So it's pretty useful. That's the way I used it. Some people will use a golden image when they churn out new VMs. I would use Kickstart every time someone needed a new system. I had a couple different definitions for different types of systems, and it would just kick off brand new build in 15 to 20 minutes. I'd have a brand new VM running in my environment.
And in fact, there's pluses and minuses. It's not an either or. It depends on your use case, because in a heavily utilized data center, you may not want to build everything from scratch, which is why people tend towards the template boat, where everything's already baked, all the packages are already installed. The downside to that is that a lot of your templates can get out of date. You have to really stay on top of keeping those current. Otherwise, you run into the same problem. Whereas the advantage of using Kickstart is that you're building a brand new machine. It's never been touched. It only takes on the configuration and the packages that you tell it to. The downside to that is if you're spinning up a brand new environment of dozens of systems, then you're going to be kind of bandwidth intensive and resource intensive, really, because you're looking at pulling down all those packages, doing the install of all of those packages. But you do get a very clean, it's an unused system on the other side. Whereas templates, you kind of end up with all the cruft and everything of trying to maintain those images. So it's kind of an either or. One other thing I wanted to point out is our systems, because like right now I'm doing a live stream, and while I've got a hard line on my laptop here, the virtual machine and the live stream are competing for resources. So as you can see, we're not very far along in the install process. It's still downloading some of the packages that are going to get installed, even though we're doing a minimal install. So in this situation, I probably would have tended towards a template. And then something I wanted to get your take on was Steve in our chat actually pointed out that you can use Ansible to deploy a VM or a cloud instance.
Sure, and this actually highlights one of the big powers behind making an image instead of a kickstart. Is in the cloud, it's more difficult to call a kickstart because you're not installing a system. They're all based on images, right? So making this stuff, either using Kickstart to make yourself a, did I drop out? No, I'm back.
No, you're fine.
Okay, sorry. I got an alert on the screen that said I was unstable. Anyway, where was I? You could make an image based on a Kickstart and then upload it to your cloud provider, or you can use Image Builder or something to make a very similar deployment. Although Kickstart does have some options that Image Builder doesn't currently offer. But yeah, so the idea of using a image and then coming back in with Ansible so you could use Ansible to kick off the deployment. It deploys an image, and then you can use Ansible to come back and do all of the configuration that your Kickstart might have done. That's great for a cloud deployment. It's even great for on-prem, but Kickstart's just another option. Yeah.
Right, and Kickstart would be great, especially with things like RHEL system roles or Ansible automation platform, Satellite, because in the post-install script, you could actually call your Ansible playbook, and you can pass in the correct tags and whatnot to trigger Ansible to install certain things. So it depends on how you want to layer your cake. Depends on what flavors you want to use. It would be very easy to take a very generic Kickstart file to get your system a clean install, and in the post-install script, which is just a bash script, which we've covered on the show before, was to call your Ansible book, and it'll then configure the system based on use cases. And Aaron, I am so glad you asked. Aaron in the chat asks if we've covered Image Builder in another video. So actually, in preparation for this show, we looked, and in 46 episodes, we have not covered one of my favorite topics, and that is Image Builder. But we did actually, Nate, you were filling in that day too. We have a Red Hat Enterprise Linux Presents episode 42, where Terry Bowling joined Nate and myself, and we talked about Image Builder. But needless to say, we'll do an introduction to Image Builder on Enter the Terminal on a future date. But for in the meantime, there's that episode of RHEL Presents you can go out and catch, talking about Image Builder and what that looks like. Because being a former VMDK template building sysadmin, Image Builder really fits that build, because you can predefine. I want Image Builder to put all of this configuration into an ISO file, and then I can deploy that ISO file to my bare metal systems, or I can put it on a flash drive. Image Builder supports the big three cloud providers like AWS, Google, and Azure, with more in the works. Image Builder could also deploy a QCOW2 file or a VMDK for import into a hypervisor. So it's not an either or. It's not a versus. It's what matches your workflow.
It's really about what's the right tool for your deployment. What's the right tool for
exactly.
your job? Yeah.
And it comes down to personal preference because Aaron in our chat mentions that he's found Kickstart to be a bit finicky. So you have to have things just right for things to work. And Kickstart is a little bit older and it doesn't have all the YAML goodness that we enjoy today.
Some of the caveats I found about Kickstarter is one, if you're depending on network connectivity, sometimes that can really bite you. As long as you have a stable network connection or whatever, it's usually not a big problem. But disk changes, right? So Kickstart is very
Yes.
prescriptive as far as what the partition layout is going to be. You can make that a little more dynamic with some of those prescripts. But if things like the device name has changed because you switched architectures, right? Whether it's SDA or HDA, right, can sometimes throw off Kickstart. Um, Architecture differences in the CPU, the package sets, whatever, those can all really throw off Kickstart. So yes, there is, I don't want to call it instability, but there is some
Some
persnicketiness.
caveats. I like that much better. Persnicketyness.
Right.
So So this is when doing a live show becomes entertaining because I figured we could vamp on this topic long enough that the install would be complete. But when we took a baseline of how long this process would take, we did not take into account that for some reason my server didn't want to use the Kickstart ISO, kept running into issues. So we're on my laptop, and then we're also live streaming on the same device. So
Yeah.
fortunately, it's almost like you and I've done this kind of work before. We have a backup plan. So I'm going to do something you shouldn't do, and as soon as my oh yeah, that window's really mad.
Yeah. So for comparison's sake, when I made this ISO file and tested it on my home lab, it took about 8 minutes to deploy the entire system, right? And that was from the moment I powered it on, selected that menu item, and hit enter to the point where I got a login prompt, right? So what would happen is you saw it going through the package install. It was probably about halfway done at that point. Once that finished, it would tidy things up. It would build your bootloader, things like that, and then it would reboot. And then after the reboot, you'd get to a login prompt, and that root password that we defined should have worked, right? And then we could have logged in to show you that RHEL was installed because that was the only package we told it to add. But I think what Eric's doing here is he pre-baked, he ran this ISO once before, and now he's gonna just boot that one up
Yeah,
to show you
it
what it would
worked
look like at
fine.
the end. It
It
worked
worked
fine
on my
then.
machine, just
Yeah,
not
look,
not with a live stream. So
look.
if we so kind of like a good cooking show, hey, when we come back, we're going to go take this other cake out of the oven that we made before the show. So remember our super secret password. So this is the exact same Kickstart file. So the Kickstart that we built at the beginning of the show, this is the exact same thing. I just ran it yesterday afternoon just to make sure everything would work. And even on my laptop with slightly fewer resources, it ran in about 8 to 10 minutes. So yeah, live stream, virtual machine, not always a great combination. So with that said, we actually installed a package ahead of time. So if we do DNF list, I think it's list installed. And then we installed rear. Oh, let me switch this back so you can see what I'm typing. So right now, DNF is actually pulling together a list of packages, and ta-da!
Yep, there it
Rear is
is.
installed.
So you might wonder how hard is it to actually make one of these Kickstart files. So of course we showed you a tool that you can just go to our website, make a Kickstart file. There's actually more options available to you that aren't necessarily built into that GUI. But when you install a system, say you went through the GUI installer and you picked all the things and you got your build just right. Uh, what gets generated inside a root home directory, and what Eric is showing you right here, is that anaconda-ks file. That's a KS file, a Kickstart file, that was generated by Anaconda at build time, right? So it should basically include exactly what the Kickstart file we provided on the ISO included in this case, because it was built from a Kickstart file. But if you build a server manually using the installer, it'll give you the same concept, right? It'll give you a Kickstart file that you could then throw onto a new ISO and build a new machine exactly in the way that you built that one.
In fact, as you can tell right here under like packages, this is probably the best example here. You can see where we called the minimal environment group, and then we called the rear RPM as part of a backup client install. That was
Right.
kind of the
So
main things that we changed.
yep. So if you wanted to take this as a base to then sort of recycle into like a web server, for example, you could add in Apache or you could add in Nginx right there after where it says rear, right? And then of course you can add in a line for the firewall that says we have to open up port 80 and 443 because if it's going to be a web server, you need those things, right? And then now this won't change it on the installed system, but then you can take
Right.
this Kickstart file and build a new system using it, and then you'll have those packages included at install time as well.
And so you actually shared a pretty neat trick about embedding the. If I can get my system to copy and paste, about embedding a Kickstart file into an ISO. When I've worked in organizations that bootstrap their images, the fun thing was that there's usually just some small little utility virtual machine out there somewhere in the data center that had a completely open FTP site, and that's where we drop configuration files that we were going to call. But what we did for this was actually embed the Kickstart into an ISO and make that basically one of the boot options. So we've got an article out on access.redhat. It is technically gated content, but as long as you have a Red Hat customer account, you just go out, register, create an account for free. You should be able to get to this article without any problems. You can go out and it'll walk you step by step through the process of embedding a Kickstart file, whether it's the one that we're showing here on our system, or one that you use our lab to develop. Either way, you can embed that into an ISO file.
And the nice thing about doing it that way is, first of all, the procedure really isn't that hard. It might sound difficult. We're building an ISO file. There's tooling on every RHEL system right out of the box that lets you do this. As long as you have a Linux machine, you can build an ISO file. But you basically take the content of the ISO, put it in your file system, add the Kickstart file, modify the bootloader, and again, this is just a text file change you make that adds the Kickstart, the location of the Kickstart to your boot arguments. Then, of course, like I missed, you're going to want to set the default to the Kickstart. And then you can actually burn that to a DVD if you want to. You use, what's the tool? MK ISO FS. Writes it back to an ISO. You can burn that to a DVD and plop it into a physical server. You could use a tool to write that to a USB stick and plug that into a physical server. Or, like we did here, you can boot a VM off of it, and it'll come up just as though there was a CD or a DVD plugged into it.
So I can imagine, like, if you work in some kind of co-located data center, or you work for a big web hosting provider, if you've got a bunch of physical machines, you could get a number of USB sticks off of Amazon for a few bucks and burn that ISO onto all of these USB sticks, go out to the data center, and you wouldn't even really need the crash cart. As long as you've got that flag set to where it boots automatically from the Kickstart file, you could take 6 USB sticks, burn that ISO image to all 6 of them, carry your little bag of USB sticks out to the data center, put in your headphones, listen to some music, and just literally plug in the USB drive, hit power, and do that 6 times, walk away for 20 minutes, come back, and you'd have 6 physical servers with a Kickstart file already deployed, and you can have them set to reboot after install. And so you'd be sitting in a login prompt for all these servers, and depending on how precise your Kickstart file and or your Ansible playbooks, system roles, things like that, you could have 6 already configured hardware nodes just ready to go. And even you could even scale that out. I mean, wouldn't have to be 6, could be 12, or you just take those 6 and go over to the next set of servers and run from there.
And to make that even more dynamic, you can make, instead of even using a USB stick or an ISO file or a CD or a DVD, you can have a Pixie boot server that your machine will ask its network card, hey, do you see a Pixie server? Oh, look, there's a Pixie server. And it'll boot off of an image it pulls from the Pixie server. Then that image will tell it, go get the Kickstart file from this network location. Here's all your content over here on some RHEL repository. You can do all that manually. Or like I said, Satellite includes a bunch of features that makes that all really easy because it already has all the pieces you need. You just have to configure them and set them up.
So that's kind of all the questions out of chat. And for Into the Terminal episode, this wasn't very terminally, but I think it really highlights the
It's a
fact that
terminal right
there's
there. It's right there on the screen. There's a terminal. We're in the terminal.
yeah,
You
we
met your
just didn't do
requirement.
much with it. Yeah, I agree with Aaron. Find my cursor again. Here is in the virtual machine. I agree with Aaron. Pixie is kind of a pain to set up, but once you get it set up, once you get it working, it's really nice to have, especially if you're in the middle of a like a hardware refresh or even virtual machines for that matter. But so that's just one of the many ways that we have as systems administrators in our back pocket um, to provision new systems. And next time we have Mr. Nate and myself back together on Into the Terminal, we're actually going to cover another method for deploying new servers, and that will be Cloud Init. So if you're deploying an image on a cloud provider, something like I use DigitalOcean pretty heavily for my home lab, and you can use Cloud Init to also deploy standard images, whether those are managed by the cloud provider or one that you custom build yourself and upload to that cloud provider. You can accomplish the same thing with Cloud Init. And then the third one in this series will be Image Builder. So I'm not sure when those two episodes will be. We promised a troubleshooting episode, and I know Scott's been really excited to break things live on air on purpose for a change, and then go through how to troubleshoot those and fix those. So
I feel like every episode of Into the Terminal turns into a troubleshooting episode, doesn't it?
it does, but for some reason that wasn't enough. Scott wanted to like break something on purpose and then fix it live on air. So I
You
think
might as
that's
well
the
be
differentiator.
consistent, right?
Right. Fortunately, today the only thing that broke was competing bandwidth on my laptop. So, all in all, pretty good episode considering that you're live on location and my laptop was crying the whole time. So,
Yeah, I didn't even expect to have good enough Wi-Fi to make this call. However, I am
yeah,
getting low on battery, so I hope we're almost done.
we are. So yeah, join us back next week. Actually, I think I'm out next week, so it's you and Scott that are going to break things. So join Nate and Scott next week to talk about troubleshooting something and how to fix that live on the air. And then we've also got RHEL Presents next week. We'll be talking about RHEL and Ansible automation platform. So join me there with Brian Smith and one of the Ansible technical marketers. We'll be talking about Ansible automation platform and RHEL. In the meantime, please like and subscribe. Your likes and subscriptions help drive the type of content that we produce here, and make sure to share with a friend. Into the Terminal's designed to help systems administrators, whether you've been a sysadmin for 2 months or 20 years, to kind of get deeper into the terminal, no pun intended. But until then, on behalf of Nate, my co-host for today, and the entire Red Hat Enterprise Linux team, and on behalf of all Red Hatters that watch this, enjoy We Are Red Hat Week. Until then, we will see you next time. Thank you all for joining us.
A great one, everybody.